G'day everyone, welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory, as always, joined by my lovely co-host Iowa Joe. Today welcoming on special guest, senior writer for The Packers and the co-host of Packers Unscripted, Wes Hodkiewicz. Wes, how are you? It's amazing to have you on. Both Joe and myself are extremely excited to finally talk to you and get to hear your thoughts on the team. But how are you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. I appreciate you having me on. And I always get a kick out of these type of podcasts in particular when you got, two guys randomly in the United States, another guy out in Australia, and the power of technology pulling us all together here. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, I have to say that on my vacation, I spent a lot of time stalking Wes just so I could get him to come on the podcast. So if he asks you where the beach is or where the check is, just kind of go along with it, okay?
Wait, hold on a second. So I just thought that was just a happenstance run-in that we had in the atrium, and now you're mentioning that you're stalking it. No, it was good.
No,
it was cool.
Actually, it really was in a way, which is weird because I hang around a lot of Wes's.
Hold on, 1 second. You got me there, Joe. I pulled my own headset out. I got so excited. My apologies.
he tried to run away already. But see, I hang out with a lot of Wes's. I was actually waiting in the atrium for my little brother, my good friend Wes Hoyda. And
is that really his last name?
Yeah.
Wes Hoyda? I'm Wes Hodkiewicz, and that's Wes Hoyda?
Yeah, I said
fantastic.
It's amazing. So I was actually waiting there for him to get off work so we could go hang out. And I was like, I think that's Wes Hodkiewicz. I think that's Wes. And I think we've met one other time. And this was, I think, early on when you started with the Packers, because I always go up to training camp. And
nice.
So I think there's one other time, but I'm getting to the point where I don't even remember it anymore. So
hopefully I wasn't a douchebag. So
no, you're not a Demosky, so we're good.
Let's go.
We love you, Rob.
Yeah, I do. Rob's great. But yeah, it just so happened that I caught you right at the right time. So
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so here we are.
That's my story, and I'm going to stick to it for now. Ignore all those other messages, will you?
So, Wes, as someone who is obviously much closer to the team than I am, and Joe as well, I just wanted to ask you kind of what's like the feeling around this team. Obviously, you've been able to talk to the players and QB1. Like, what's the kind of sentiment and, what's the energy you're getting from this team?
It's a really positive energy, Nick. I feel like, it's a really free-flowing, loose group. Now, certainly it is the off-season program. There is no game that they're preparing for on Sunday. But in those 9 weeks and the five practices we were able to watch, I think my biggest takeaway is just how much these young guys are enjoying the process. And this is a very young football team. I mean, I was running some numbers for the Q&A that we do on our website, our Insider Inbox column, and 43 of these players have been drafted to Green Bay on the 90-man offseason roster. I mean, I think there was another 15 or so that have signed as college free agents with this team over the last 2 years. You look at the receiver position, I think there's like maybe, 11 combined starts in the NFL among them. I mean, it is a young NFL team, but at the same time, I think with the way things have gone and the way I think some people maybe view the Packers in the post Aaron Rodgers era, I think there also is this feeling that there isn't a lot to lose. And if anything that I learned over these last 9 weeks, the biggest thing is that this team believes in Jordan Love. And I know there's been a lot out there about, okay, is he the guy? Isn't he the guy? Has he made splash plays? Jordan Love has all the tools. And I think when you talk to guys like Aaron Jones and Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, the guys that are going to be the heart and soul of this football team, particularly on the offensive side of the ball this year, I think there's a lot of belief in this young man. It has nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers. The Aaron Rodgers era was great in Green Bay. It was a fantastic ride, a successful championship producing ride. But as we've always seen, guys, I mean, there comes a time where you make that move to the next guy. And I think when you look at Jordan Love getting 3 years to get acclimated to the NFL, to catch up and understand what's going to be expected of him with this offense, I think everybody else is ready to jump on the train and see where it takes them.
So, and I know you got to be careful with what you say and all that stuff because we don't want to get you in trouble or anything. But do you think there is kind of a shift in philosophy now that Rodgers is gone and they're going with a guy that's been groomed into this system? Or do you think it's still about the same and, they're just going to a younger guy who can, relatively do similar stuff?
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Joe, on that. And you are right. I mean, when you go from a guy that has been in the league as long as Aaron Rodgers was, right? The longest tenured player in Packers history from 2005 to 2022. And then you go to a guy that has started, a game and a half in the National Football League. I mean, that is going to be it's going to be an abrupt shift, right? So I think when you look at the scheme of Matt LaFleur's offense and him and Rodgers made such a great partnership together, right? I mean, 2 MVPs, right, yeah. NFC Championship appearances. But at the end of the day, the scheme, if you go back to the principle of it with Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, this offense has never been predicated on having a MVP quarterback carry all the water for everybody. No, it's on making life easier for the quarterback and using the full entree of options with your offense. And I feel like Jordan Love is going to get, free reign. I feel like he's going to have every opportunity to make this thing his own. But I do believe there's going to be things that Matt LaFleur and these offensive coaches can do to make his life easier, whether it's the pre-snap motions, whether it's the play action game, whether it's the resources they've invested in the middle of the field, right? With, a guy like Luke Musgrave and Jaden Reed, these guys are playmakers that could potentially really help the Packers, kind of infiltrate that area of the field, which has been a grind at times. So I feel like there's going to be certain aspects of the offense that probably will look different because you're switching to a 24-year-old quarterback that's a first-time starter. But at the same time, the system is the system. And I do feel like there's going to be the staples that we've seen the last 3 years with Matt LaFleur continued on now as we begin the Jordan Love era.
Yeah, and I know I've run into the bad habit of saying, well, now we'll actually get to see what LaFleur's offense can do. Because, really, at the end of the day, we know Rodgers was changing a lot at the line. So, we don't – but then again, LaFleur gave him the go-to. If you see something different, I'm going to rely on you on that. So I think that's why I've always said when people ask me how this year's going to do is I don't know, but I'm excited. Yes. Because it's something completely different than – what we're used to. But another kind of side question on that, do you also think that had something to do with the draft this year? Because it seems like they never really put forth too much in bringing young tight ends into the system. They were always trying to bring in those older guys that Rodgers was more to mesh with. But now they went out and drafted the 2, guys who look athletic as hell and should be able to produce well. Do you think that went into the draft this year?
Well, I do to some extent, Joe, because I also look at this as we've known for several years here the Packers are going to have to make a move at tight end. Did I expect it to be them doubling down in the same day of the draft? Not necessarily. I mean, I believe that one of the stats I pulled out was this is only like the second time in franchise history Packers have actually drafted 2 tight ends in the same year. It's just not the way they've typically done business, whether it's Ron Wolf, Ted Thompson, or Brian Gutekunst as the GM. But at the same time, Robert Tunyon's gone now. Mercedes Lewis is still a free agent. As much as I would love to see him back in Green Bay, that is what it is. And if you're going to go in a new direction, you need to be able to invest those resources. Yeah, there's the man. But the thing of it is that they found 2 really good prospects. I think Musgrave's a guy that if he's healthy last year, he's probably a guy that sneaks even closer to the first round, maybe into the first round. When you look at a 10-yard split that he had, 6'5", 253 pounds, people don't move that explosively at that level. And then in Tucker Kraft, I mean, this guy's got everything in front of him. I mean, his redshirt sophomore year was as impressive as you're going to find, and certainly some injuries slowed him last year. But I think this was the right time to make this move because it's going to take time, Joe. You're not just going to be able to throw in tight ends and just expect that, hey, you got Travis Kelce. It's going to be a process, but You need to be able to get those prospects in the pipeline if you're truly going to be able to develop them and find that next phase of your offense.
Well, I've got one more question, and then I'll let Nick get into it. Now, to special teams, and we know that, bringing in Rich Bisaccia, once he got started and, everything started to gel, it really turned around our special teams. Well, now we've had almost like a complete overhaul when it comes to it. Are they really trusting in Anders, or is there like a contingency? Mason's still out there. Could it come, towards the end of training camp where, maybe Anders needs a little bit more time? Let's bring Mason back in. And because I know Brian Gutekunst said that, not everything, Mason didn't go into the year last year completely healthy. So he thought that he still had some juice to go. It just, he wasn't completely healthy until towards the end. So what are you seeing on that end?
Well, the one thing Mason probably doesn't want me to say this, but the one thing I learned from last year is that Mason Crosby probably doesn't need a training camp. I mean, the guy wasn't actually cleared from the PUP list until it was time for the regular season, and then was able to continue on his consecutive games played streak after a little bit of concern and nervousness there. Here's the thing. I've said this time and time again. I didn't want to see Mason Crosby 17 years into his NFL career competing against a rookie 6th-round pick. If you're going to draft or kicker, allow that young man the opportunity, the bandwidth to be able to earn that job. And if something happens down the road, maybe that's where you look at a Crosby, or if Mason's gone, you have Robbie Gould still out there. You see it every year, not just the position Green Bay's in, but all the time. There's kickers that, don't work out, and then you go and find a veteran and you try to get through the season. That being said, Rich Bisaccia is really sold on Anders Carlson. And this is a guy that he worked with his older brother, Daniel. He's known Anders since he was a young man at Auburn. And watching this guy kick, Joe, we didn't get to see him until minicamp during the practices, but he has a booming leg. And the last couple of years, the stats are what they are, but you got to think about what he was dealing with. Last year, he's kicking with a brace on his plant leg. That's not the natural thing for a kicker to have to do after he tore his ACL the previous year. I feel like they're going to roll with the punches with this young man and understand there's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days, you have to get through it. The biggest challenge for Carlson, I don't think, is going to be even adjusting to the NFL. The guy's kicked in front of 100,000 people on a weekly basis. It's going to be, okay, if you get into November and December, how do you make that adjustment when you're kicking in those elements? Because I'm telling you, Green Bay, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, it is not the same as kicking everywhere else in the NFL. It is a different beast. Mason mastered it, did it that way for 15 years. But that's going to be the biggest hurdles for Anders to overcome. The track record's great, guys, with kickers that Packers have drafted. With the exception of Brett Conway, they've gotten some really, really strong kickers over the last 30 years through the draft. You hope that Carlson could be the next one.
You just had to bring up Conway, man. That just put a whole shiver down my spine.
I can't say everybody's been a hit. There was Brett Conway. But other than that, I mean, finding Mason Crosby in the 6th round in 2007 and then being able to just have that same kicker for 325 consecutive games, including playoffs, that ain't natural. That ain't the way it works out. But Mason was durable enough and smart enough and really steady enough to be that guy and give the Packers that luxury for a decade and a half.
And I've been kind of happy seeing that he's still, or at least his family is still involving themselves in Green Bay for now. So, but so just kind of, you're saying it's Anders. I don't want to get my, I was
Anders Carlson.
Wisconsin night.
No, Anders Carlson.
That Wisconsin long on there. So, but.
Yeah, but it's funny. I was talking to Colby Wooden, the Packers' 4th-round pick, who actually was locker mates with Carlson at Auburn too, and he just calls him Durs. He doesn't even mess around with the front of it. He just calls him Durs. That's his his name. So, but yeah, seems like a really nice kid. 6'5", 219 pounds. I mean, he is a long levered kid, and now going to get an opportunity to show he can kick at this level.
To stand up. I got to stand next to him on one of my days up there, so, and I even felt short to him. So I'm 6'1", 6'2". So
yeah, awesome.
For sure.
Sweet. Well, so we've talked about, obviously, Wes, you mentioned Musgrave multiple times. We just finished talking about Anders, Colby Wooden. There's so many rookies who are slotted to be starting or second string backups. So, they're going to be playing, right? And that's the exciting thing about this team. Who do you think is someone who might surprise people? Someone who's maybe a little bit under the radar, or perhaps might be doing more than we are predicting or the consensus is expecting?
Yeah, Carl Brooks is probably the guy that's the top on my list. And again, the Packers have had such a strong track record with these sort of unique body types at the defensive line position over the years. I think back to Mike Daniels, coming out of Iowa, a guy that was a 6'1", 220-pound running back, 2-star recruit, doesn't have very many offers, goes to Iowa, gets a little bit more hype behind him, but then finally gets healthy in the NFL and is a Pro Bowl type defensive tackle. I'm not saying Carl Brooks is going to do that right now, but I think when you look at what he accomplished at Bowling Green, there was this line that Elliot Wolf, I believe it was, used to always talk about. If you're drafting a guy in the third day of the draft, you're looking for attributes. You're looking for something that jumps off the page. And Carl Brooks' stats, as mostly an edge type at Bowling Green, are incredible. Now, some people will say, well, that's the MAC. But I think if you look at how much he dominated the MAC, that gives this young guy a chance, in addition to the fact that now the Packers are going to play him more at a natural 3 technique defensive tackle in the NFL. And guys, I'm telling you, I mean, if there's one position, you mentioned, there's going to be young guys that play all over the place this year, offensively, defensively, and special teams. Packers need guys to step up on the defensive line. 1,400 defensive snaps were vacated this offseason with Dean Lowry going to Minnesota and Jaron Reed going to Seattle. The Packers need guys to fill those. A lot of that's going to fall on Devontae Wyatt. A lot of it is going to fall over on TJ Slayton. But there was one practice in OTAs where Wyatt didn't go. So Colby Wooden was the next guy up. Carl Brooks is the next guy up. Jonathan Ford, the 7th-round pick last year out of Miami, is the next guy up. The Packers are that close from playing guys that have never played in the National Football League before, and they need those guys to respond. So I look at a guy like Brooks as a rotational interior defensive lineman who right away off the bat could potentially contribute for this defense if he proves that he's worthy of those snaps during training camp.
Do you think that's a position that they could dive into the free agency pool to maybe bring in a vet?
They could, Joe, but at the same time, I mean, it's been one of those spots too where I just feel like I wrote about this early in the offseason. The Packers want to improve their run defense, right? There's things that they need to shore up. I like the idea of just shuffling the deck, going with some prospects that you like and hoping that, that works out. If it doesn't, a couple of years ago, they went and signed Snacks Harrison. They've been able to go and, find occasionally some guys that can come in. I'm trying to think. Quentin Dial came in one year. I mean,
yeah,
the guy from Cleveland. Oh, what is his name? It's going to bother me. I'm going to think about this after the show.
Yeah, and I know exactly who you're talking about. I can't think of him either.
2 years ago, that came in during COVID, finished the year with them, veteran. Sorry, boys. I'm usually better at that. But they have gone... They have gone and found, though, veteran guys that can help you finish out a season. So if they need to go that direction's always there. I think defensive linemen can often be found on a little bit more of the cheaper side of things, but they need to find new stalwarts on the defensive line. The only way you're going to do it is if you give these young guys a chance. It's going to start with Slayton and Wyatt. I'm very curious to see who finishes up the rotation after that. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Sorry,
Billy.
Wynn.
Billy Wynn, thank you. See, I cover football.
He was the guy who hadn't played for a couple of years, right? And he came back.
He'd been beat up, and then he ended up signing their practice squad at the end of 20, I believe it was. COVID.
Yeah,
and he was a big prospect coming out of college when he was drafted.
Yep. For sure. Had some experience with Mike Pettin. But that's the thing. Like, you can go and find, Harrison 2 years ago coming in and finishing the season with them. There are those type of guys sometimes available, but at the end of the day, you have Kenny Clark there, a guy that is a 2-time Pro Bowler now that the Packers are trying to find more ways to sort of take some of the burden off his shoulders. I'm really excited to see what Wyatt, Slayton, and the rest of those young guys can do, trying to be the ones that step up into those spots that Lowry and Reed vacated.
I'm trying to do this diplomatic, so like I said, we don't get you in trouble for anything. But what was there any real reason given for why Devontae Wyatt really didn't see snaps last year?
Well, I think really it comes down to just finding an opportunity for him. I mean, the Packers do play more base defense now with Joe Barry because, they have that, I forget what they call it, the penny look, where it's the 3 defensive linemen, 2 edges, and 1 inside backer. They do a lot of that now, and then you got the nickel defensive coverage behind it. So they do work in a lot of defensive linemen, but fact of the matter is, guys, as long as I've been covering this team, we've talked every year about lessening snaps on Kenny Clark. Dollars to donuts, I promise you, by the end of the season, if he's healthy, Kenny Clark's going to end up playing 80% of the defensive snaps. It's just the way it always works out, right? Dean Lowry always got a full helping of snaps, and then obviously you brought in Jaron Reed. That's probably where a lot of those snaps potentially for Wyatt could have gone. That being said, he ended up playing a position that until the last month of the season stayed healthy for the Packers all year long. All these other spots, Packers are having to go get Justin Hollins. They're having to try to find guys to fill in because of injuries. Defensive line, the Packers were pretty healthy from beginning to end. Once Dean went down with that calf injury, that's where Wyatt got his opportunities. And I thought those last 2 games looked really good. It's going to be about consistency for him, right? I think he has every athletic attribute you want in a defensive lineman. It's showing that he can apply it. He can get the pad level down. He can be gap sound. He can know his assignments. That's where it's going to be for Wyatt. And he had a really interesting conversation. I've enjoyed talking with him, the little bit that we've had an opportunity to talk with him so far during his pro career. He's had some good talks with Kenny Clark, understanding what it means to be a defensive lineman in the NFL and how you have to transition into becoming a big, more stable and consistent contributor for the defense. Packers are counting on that this year. I feel like if he stays healthy, the opportunities are going to be endless for this young guy, and hopefully he's able to capture them, because I do believe there is a lot of talent there. It's just one of those situations, kind of like Rashawn Gary, 4 years ago with Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. I just don't think there were a ton of opportunities for him to go out and really be an every down type D lineman.
Well, I was just curious because, as everybody knows, the defense was really kind of getting gouged with the run, and it seemed like there needed to be, maybe a change up here, try it different. And it just seemed like every opportunity, Wyatt was kind of getting passed over. So I didn't know if there was like a, maybe he wasn't putting the work in like he should have been, or...
No, I don't think it was that, because again, the guy did everything right in terms of what we saw. Obviously what happens behind closed doors, we can never be too sure about, but I thought he had the right mindset. He had the right mentality. He didn't hang his head at all. He understood that, okay, early on in the season, my role is going to be to play 10, 12 snaps a game. And then when the opportunity came late in the year, you saw the strip sack, you saw some of the tackles for loss, and I thought he started to show a little bit more of himself. I think the big thing for the Packers is, even when some of those issues were happening, Joe, they wanted to go with their veterans. They wanted to go with the guys that they were building the defense around. And that was Reed, that was Lowry, and that was Kenny, along with the pieces that circulated around them for that run defense. So the big marker for Wyatt is going to be this training camp. It's going to probably be some of the preseason games. It's going to be showing that he did take that jump at the end of last season, can carry over some of that momentum now into 2023.
I've got 2 other guys I want to know your opinion on, and then Nick can go on to what he wants to talk to.
I think you said you were going to give it to Nick a couple minutes ago, and then you were like, I'm going to take this right back again.
Hey,
you can have one question.
It's the same thing that happened with the Dayline last year. It's a seniority,
I got you.
But, well, I always let Nick lead, and then I seem to always, go after that. So last week, if you caught last week's episode, it was really weird because Nick wasn't there, so I had to lead, and it got super awkward. But anyway, obviously I got to ask. I'm an Iowa guy. Matter of fact, I was just in Iowa City today for a doctor's appointment. So I got to know, everybody seems to be in love with this guy right now, but, they're always going to have questions. I keep hearing the same thing, he never started in college and such. But what they fail to remember is Kirk Ferentz plays the seniority thing.
Yeah.
If you've been here longer, you're going to, if you're an upperclassman, you're going to start. Do you think with Rashawn being down, Preston getting a little bit older, JJ or Kingsley or whatever he's going by now, is he slated to, just kind of sit back and learn, or do you think he's going to be thrown out there to start because of what they've got at the position?
The start word is difficult because I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. We saw it mostly with Justin Hollins and also with Inebare being the one that we're operating opposite of Preston Smith during the offseason program. But I'll tell you what, Joe, Lucas Van Ness is going to play, and he's going to be a guy that I think is going to get more opportunities than Rashawn did in 2019. This is my 12th or 13th training camp now. Speaking just from a physical perspective, this kid is one of the most incredibly built professional football players I've covered. When they say the Hercules moniker, sometimes, people have these monikers and they come in and you're like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
No, man, Lucas Van Ness is Hercules. The arm length. When I saw his first bio, like when the Packers drafted him, we got like the NFL draft report. And I saw, 6'5", 272 pounds, 81-inch wingspan. And the guy's 21 years old.
Yeah.
I'm like, this guy's a freak. And he plays to that way. Now, we didn't see him in pads, right? We got to see these guys in pads. We got to, get it to be football again. But in terms of being able to check all the boxes in terms of what he projects as, if you would have told me, Joe, and you're like, okay, Wes, here's the 13 draft picks, here's the 8 or so undrafted free agents they signed, tell me which one of these kids was the 13th overall pick without knowing anything else. It's Lucas Van Ness. And I feel like we'll see where things are at with Rashawn. I have given up on trying to figure out, hey, when is a guy going to come back from an ACL? When is he going to be available? When he's going to be off PUP? I don't know. But I do know that Lucas Van Ness is going to be a part of this thing this season because of just how many ways they can utilize him. You go back to how they did it at Iowa. He played interior defensive line his first, redshirt freshman year, and then he's an edge rusher for most of his redshirt sophomore year. And as you mentioned, the Kurt Ferentz thing, it was interesting talking to Kelvin Bell, the Iowa's defensive line coach, about this because you guys got to understand, and you know this better than anyone, but people that are Packer fans need to understand, Iowa, they don't just play the seniority game because it just works out really well on a resume. They do it because that's the way they have to do it. They have to convince kids to come to Iowa, develop, and get their opportunity. He was behind 2 redshirt seniors, and they wanted to give those young men that opportunity after investing everything they did into Iowa's football program. He didn't bat an eye at that. And I think this guy now, with proving what he did at Iowa and how much of a team player he was for the Hawkeyes, I think he's going to come in the door and he's going to be willing to do whatever the Packers ask him to, especially off the bat when you're not really sure when you're going to have Rashawn Gary back on the field.
And then the other guy I'd like to get your opinion on, you kind of mentioned him a little bit earlier, but he's kind of my sleeper pick. Obviously, I love the Van Ness pick. I'm not going to... That's my guy. He's the first jersey I've bought in like 5 years. So, that's my guy. I got to support it. But my sleeper this year, because after he was drafted, I heard a lot of great things. And when I went and watched some of, his film and that, I think he could have went higher, but I obviously I don't know the reasons why he didn't, but that's Carrington Valentine out of Kentucky. I've heard that he could be somebody who could step in day one if need be, but obviously that's not a need the Packers have right now. Yep. But
I got you.
Somebody who could slot in there. So, but what are you hearing or seeing out of him? Obviously, because it's only OTAs, but
no, I love Carrington Valentine. I see everything that Mel Kiper saw in him. I see everything that the Packers liked in him. This guy is arguably, I think, the youngest guy on the roster. And whatever his reasons were for leaving a year early, those are his reasons. And when you only have a couple picks or one pick, whatever it was, teams aren't going to maybe give you the love that other guys would get if they had 6-7 interceptions their last year of college. But what I like about Valentine is, okay, so Jair Alexander and Rasul Douglas were not at the OTAs. What did that mean? That meant that Valentine, Corey Ballentine, obviously Keyshawn Nixon in the slot, Keandre Thomas, all these corners were working against the Packers' top receivers. Valentine didn't care. He was competitively defending against Romeo Dobbs. Got a pass deflection against him in I believe it was one of the move the ball periods. He is a confident young man. And remember how I was saying, you look for attributes with young guys. In addition to liking his frame and how he projects as a cornerback, it is the fact that this is a guy that did leave school early, who I don't know how much he plays this year, but in a way, it's almost like you look at it as this is sort of like his senior year of college, right? So there's so much to like about him. And as much as you're right, the Packers don't need any starting cornerbacks right now. You eventually hope that you get Eric Stokes back, but there were some real questions there for the Packers if Rasul Douglas doesn't just pop back in at perimeter corner last year after Stokes goes down. They got lucky in that there were no other injuries, but there could have been some question marks there if any more guys went down. I just think Valentine is a guy at a wide open you have those 3 starting cornerbacks, and hopefully here you're going to get Stokes back, but there's still an opportunity there at 5 or 6, and I think Valentine is going to put himself right in that conversation once we get into the preseason and training camp, because I bet he plays a lot.
All right, Nick, you can have it now.
Thank you, Joe. The last question I just want to ask you before we get to the Mount Rushmore section of the show. We've talked all about the rookies today and, the guys who are like getting in their first NFL action. Something I always wanted to ask you about is, who do you think is looking to make a big second-year jump? Obviously, we have, Christian Watson is kind of my guy, and like a few like kind of key contributors who are going to be stepping up, like Romeo Dobbs even. Who is someone who you think is going to take like even like a kind of like a leadership role or just a larger presence on this team?
Well, I mean, the answer to that probably is Wyatt when you look at what he did his first year to what the Packers are going to be asking him the second year. But I do want to talk about Watson in particular, because what I saw from him this spring was a very confident, but yet humble. He wasn't being cocky, but just a guy that I think realized in those last 8 weeks of last season that I can do this and I can do this at a high level. And I feel like he carried that swagger with him into the offseason program. Guys, I remember our last availability, the locker room cleanout day. Watson already had his goal put down for this offseason. He wanted to put himself in a better physical position and not have to deal with the soft tissue stuff, or at least give himself a better chance at avoiding some of those type of injuries. And he came back in incredible physical condition. And when you have a guy that's 6'5", 208 pounds, runs a 4.36, has the vertical that he does, he is just an athletic marvel in terms of what is in his body. And you add in the work ethic to that, I just feel like the sky's the limit for him. And he has no problem standing in front of a camera and just being a leader, even though he's still really young at the position. I think him and Romeo Dobbs together, they forged a friendship, they forged a partnership. And in a lot of ways, it does. It reminds me of what you saw with Greg Jennings and James Jones and Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb and all these other. You want to have those guys that you can bounce off of each other and also have those complementary skill sets, right? So when you see Watson do what he did those last 8 weeks, so many things have to work out, and they have to all, you have to avoid injuries. You have to avoid, quarterback changes. You got to hope that everybody stays healthy around you. But the way he finished last year really just makes me very curious about what a 17-game season could look like for that young man, because I thought everything about him in that month of November, really screamed superstar.
That's Nick's boy.
Love to hear it. He's the first jersey that I bought, and it's
a smart jersey. Yeah, I mean,
it's
and it's number 9. It's cool, but I mean, like, there's certain guys that you think about. Okay, so the Packers didn't necessarily draft him with the pick that they got from Devontae Adams, but everybody knew the game last year, right? Yeah, you signed Sammy Watkins. Yes, you have Allen coming back, but the guy that they traded 2 first-round picks for, the guy that they moved up to take at 34 was Christian Watson. And whether he was a first-round pick or not, I'm sure they'll make up something about that someday. But the fact of the matter is that he was seen as the big prospect for this offense. And I felt like after some initial turbulence there, it allowed him to kind of find his footing there in the second half. And it was a story I wrote on our website this past week. If there was anything that he could take away from that season, it's managing disappointment, adversity, and setback, and it's managing success and triumph. And I felt like whether he was rising or falling or somewhere in between, Watson proved that he can be a pro, and he's a guy that is not going to just kind of wilt under expectations. He's going to thrive and look for his next opportunity.
Love to hear it. Love to hear it. Awesome. Yeah, that's so great to hear. Like your perspective, being so close to these guys and being able to talk to them, and that the story about the locker room clean day. That's so amazing to hear. The last thing I want to do here with you, Wes, before we finish up, Joe's kind of been wondering about your Green Bay Mount Rushmore, and obviously I've never been. I imagine you guys have a much better idea what that's about. That's about. But from what I know, it's kind of the four most important, influential players, team figures of all time for the Green Bay Packers. Yeah. Who belongs on your Mount Rushmore?
It was a tough question, and it's one of those things where it's like, I wish I had two Mount Rushmores. I wish you had one that was just personnel and you just had players, but I'm not going to cop out of that. I'm going to take the four. But to me, it goes with Curly Lambeau. For better or for worse, I know there were good and bad with Curly Lambeau, but the fact of the matter is, the shirt I'm wearing, the house that I live in, the job that I have, none of that's not possible if not for Curly Lambeau. And in addition to being a Hall of Famer, a guy that helped build the foundations of this league, he also is the one that had the foresight to keep this organization going. The ways that they had to do it, whatever it was, stock sales, burning buildings, everything, right? I mean, Curly Lambeau was the guy that set that foundation. I love to... You put me in a tight spot because I wanted to put both Vince Lombardi and Bob Harlan on that Mount Rushmore, but I can't do it because then now suddenly I have one actual player left. So, but I am going to still do Lombardi just because he was the guy that I think when I think of the Green Bay Packers, 105 years or whatever it's been now of franchise history, it's about what people allowed this place to keep going, what people allowed this place to thrive. And Lombardi's the one that brought the respect factor back. And if you don't get Vince Lombardi there at the end of the 50s, is there a Green Bay Packers in 1970? Is there a Green Bay Packers in 1980? Lombardi's the one that, in addition to, the personnel decisions that were made, the players that were drafted, the foundation that was put in place, Lombardi put all those pieces to work. From there, it gets really tricky. I'm going to go, well, first and foremost, I put Aaron Rodgers on that list because he represents to me the current generation, the Super Bowl 45 team, the team that has been a perennial winner throughout his tenure as the quarterback, a 4-time MVP, a guy that has accomplished all these different things. He is the face of the 21st century of the Green Bay Packers, and I feel like you have to give him that respect. Where it gets difficult for me is figuring out who represents most that 1996 era. Brett Favre is there, obviously, but I want to give some credit to Reggie White, and I think that's why I'm picking him as my fourth guy. Because as somebody said in our Insider Inbox column, it really resonated with me. Reggie White represented hope. After 29 years of ineptitude, yes, Brett Favre was there. Yes, Ron Wolf was there. Yes, the foundation was being built, Mike Holmgren. But Reggie White is the guy at the dawn of the free agent era that said, you know what? I'm a future Hall of Famer already. I'm going to go to Green Bay. And that decision, I think, was the confident boost that they needed. So you can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but I guess if you ask me and you put me on the spot with those questions, I'm going Lambeau, going Lombardi, I'm going White, and I'm going Aaron Rodgers.
Man, I don't know if I want to go after that.
It's a good list.
But for me, Joe, before you do though, for me, it's all about understanding that there isn't a $1 billion owner behind this thing, right? The Green Bay Packers at every interval over the last 100 years have needed to win. You don't have to win every year, but you need to be able to have that type of success to keep fans coming out, to keep the stadium upgraded, to be able to do all that. And when I look at those four, and you can take any different qualification you want to create a Mount Rushmore, and you won't be wrong. But to me, I think all four of those guys represent pretty much every championship the Green Bay Packers have ever won.
And you're right. I mean, when I was trying to create my Rushmore, I was like, there's so many easy picks, but then there's so many that deserve it, but how do you top which one? Or so I went.
You realize four, you subtract by four pretty quick. Four goes away really fast. Yeah, when you're trying to figure that out.
So when I did mine, of course, I put Vince Lombardi on there. I was thinking about me, and I can never pronounce the guy's last name, but Wes, you probably know him a little bit, or know the name a little bit more
Jack
than I do,
Finisi?
but it's the guy that hired Vince.
Oh,
It's
was
like
it?
Olsen.
Oh, Dom Olnichek.
Yeah, there you go.
Mhm.
I was thinking about that because without him taking the chance on Vince,
Yeah.
then we probably might not have been in that situation. But obviously, I went with Vince Lombardi. You know, the trophy's named after him. You know, like you said, that's what people recognize when they think of the Packers. You know, hell, I've got a button up here. If I wanted to hit it, it's what the hell's going on out there. You know, so I mean, he's quotable. He was innovative. He was, you know, both loved and hated by his own players. That, you know, it was hard not to, and you know, it makes you wonder, had he caught, you know, went to the doctor sooner and all that stuff, if he might have stuck around a little bit longer, or how his legacy might have went that way. But you know, that's a whole nother story for another day. Then I went Don Hudson, because really Don Hudson like innovated the wide receiver position.
Mhm.
And you know, I don't think there's ever been a wide receiver since that's won 2 MVPs. I don't think there's been a
What,
receiver since that's won at least
a
one
MVP?
MVP.
Yeah, and there
Yeah.
probably won't
So
be
I
another. There
mean,
won't be another one, I bet.
and I know it's a completely different time and a completely different era, but that's still an amazing thing. And you know, this is also a guy that was playing more than just wide receiver. He was
Yeah.
playing defensive back. He was kicking. You know, he did all this other stuff. So, and he's always been the guy that if I could go back in time to watch a game, that would be, you know, a lot of people, oh, I'd love to go see the Ice Bowl, or I'd love to go see this, or I'd love to go see Don Hudson play, because that guy was basically what we have now in a Christian Watson, but in a time period when there were no other
There
Christian
were no
Watsons.
Jair Alexanders. Guys
So,
just running through everybody.
and so that'd be another one. I went with Reggie too. Reggie, I know it's such the easy thing to say Brett Favre's what got you into you know, Packer football. Brett Favre is this, but Reggie on my end was the guy that got me into more of the Packer
Mhm.
football. Now I have family up in Wisconsin, so I kind of grew up in the culture anyway. But what really got me going was Reggie, because he was that soft-spoken type of guy off the field, but then when you got him on the field, he was a terror. I mean, it was just a flip of the switch and he was gone. And I mean, that was the first jersey I ever owned, was Reggie White. The night that they retired his jersey, I retired my jersey and I never wore it ever again. So kind of a personal reason, but then again, because like you said, Wes, that, you know, he was the guy that when free agency kicked, you know, the famous story from Mike Holmgren, you know, Reggie said that God had let me know where to go, and Mike Holmgren called him and said, Reggie, this is God, come to Green Bay. So,
Yeah.
you know,
But they
so
needed that spark. They needed that. They
they
needed it.
did. And even now, Green Bay has a hard time with some of these free agents not wanting to go there. So it just really was that push. And then the last guy I got is Ron Wolf, because
Yeah.
Ron Wolf is the guy that brought the Packers back into the winning tradition. Now, you could put Bob Harlan there. You know, you could probably substitute one or the other, because, you know, Bob Harlan, another Iowa guy, Des Moines, you know, all that good stuff. But between the two of them, they brought the winning culture back to Green Bay.
They
If it
did.
wasn't for Ron taking the chance to you know, go for Reggie, to, you know, trade a first round pick for Brett Favre, to bring in free agents like Keith Jackson and Andre Rison and Seth Joyner and all these guys, who knows how, you know, how much longer the Packers would be in obscurity. So, you know, I think that in itself would have to put Ron Wolf, or like I said, you could flip flop him and Bob Harlan either way, because without Bob, Ron's not going to get hired and Ron's not going to go on. You know, obviously Ron's got to okay stuff through Bob Harlan. So without Bob saying, you know, yeah, that's good, go for it, you know, we could be the next Detroit right now, and that's a scary thought.
The best part I always like about the Bob Harlan story, in addition to being just an amazing man and everything he did for the Atrium and keeping the team here in Green Bay, but it's the fact that he hired a GM that, now obviously Ron Wolf did a lot with the Raiders, but had a nightmarish run with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? A situation that probably nobody would have been able to succeed in. He hires Wolf, and then he trades. Wolf goes and trades a first-round pick for a guy that had thrown 2 passes, and they both went to the opposing team the previous season. I mean, I've always joked. I mean, can you imagine if Twitter was around when the Packers pull off that trade? They'd been like, "You're trading a first-round pick for Brett Favre? Why isn't it a conditional 7th?" But he believed in his guy. He always did. He believed with him before that draft too, and that's what you got to do at every point when you talk about great GMs, great coaches, and also great players. You have to take a chance at some point, and both of those guys did that.
Well, Nick, we're running low on time, so why don't you go ahead and give us your
3 quick seconds.
So, well, luckily you guys have made it a bit easy for me because we share a lot of the same guys. Lombardi, I think, is for me is probably the most obvious one. And as someone who's a bit younger, I am like a bit biased, like with Curly Lambeau. That's like, I probably should have included him on there as well. You're very correct, Wes.
No, hey, it all works. Yeah.
There's no wrong answers.
No.
True, very true. Except, yeah.
Well, unless you put like Brett Conway or somebody like that on there, Joe
Michael
Johnston
Clark,
or something.
7th string receiver.
Good basketball player.
Yeah, and then obviously Favre / Reggie White, the like revitalization of the Packers. For me, like one of the biggest reasons why I continue to follow the team is obviously the fact that it doesn't have an owner, like you said, Wes. But the continued culture and like sort of institutional nature of what Ron Wolf established in the 90s is something I think is just so special, because I mean, how many teams really have their own like tree of coaches that still follow almost the exact same kind of philosophy and can consistently perform at a high level? I mean, like, last week I was on, I covered, Gutekunst's tenure, and obviously, he comes from that tree, and the fact that he was able to flip this roster in 2-3 years to arguably the best roster in the league, it's just like that. It's just so amazing that we still continue to get these guys from within the organization, and it's one of the reasons why I trust the Packers to be a good team in general. That's why I feel safe going into this new era, because I know they're going to be making smart decisions. And yeah, the only one I had who wasn't on your guys' list was Charles Woodson. I just think his whole entire involvement with the team is the perfect encapsulation of what Green Bay's culture is. I mean, he's a guy who came in and he didn't want to be there. The very infamous like sort of like attitude issues and kind of arguing with the coaches and things like that. And by the time that he was done, he was beloved by the fan base. He loved Green Bay, he still does, and he's still involved with the team. It's so funny how that kind of flips around, and is a guy that I think we kind of missed in the past couple of years. Someone who can really emotionally rally and who can push the defense to be better versions of themselves. I think you'd have a hard time not running through a brick wall for that guy if you were on the same team.
Yeah.
I just think, that's something I have a very special place in my heart. And also he has my favorite jersey number ever. So, that's definitely a few points there.
Somebody asked us in our inbox column about what are the most like iconic numbers that aren't retired, but you equate them with players. So certainly I said Leroy Butler right away, but I'll tell you what, man, when you think of the modern era of Packers football, 21, Charles Woodson, I think of it in the same way as I think of 36 with Leroy. I mean, that when I see someone wearing, respect to Eric Stokes, but when I see somebody wearing 21 now, I think that's Charles Woodson's number. He earned that.
Those are some big shoes to fill, and it's kind of good that they do retire some numbers. Could you imagine trying to give somebody 92 or somebody number 4 or
Never.
15 or
14?
Dude,
we almost had like a crazed like media thing with Sean Clifford being in Aaron Rodgers' locker. Like, could you imagine like they're passing out 12? I mean, my God, I can't even.
Yeah,
But that's football.
And like I said, I used to go to a lot of the training camps, and anytime one of the UDFAs had come out with number 5, it was, oh, that's so wrong. That's Horning. Why is he wearing? Isn't that retired now?
The thing that I think that people don't realize is when you have 90 players on the roster, yes, you can do some doubling up with numbers, but there's only 99 numbers. Well, now there's 100 because you can wear 0, but they haven't passed that out yet. Like, I think people sometimes realize, like, yeah, you're going to have to occasionally use a 5 during training camp to get through things, but it is what it is.
Well, I keep joking that soon it's going to end up being like A, B, C, and
just a little tiny
100 101 or
it says 01 and there's like a tiny 1 in the front of it. Yeah, I could see that.
5 to the second power. Well, that's all I got. What else do you got, Nick?
No, that's all. Yeah,
I think Nick's got class.
Yeah, I'm about to get in detention. No, I just want to say again, from both Joe and myself, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a joy to run the show with you here and pick your brain for all this information that otherwise would never have access to.
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
hopefully
boys.
we can get you back sometime, maybe in training camp or something. Not during season, because I know that's your busy time, but maybe during the training camp so we can get a bird's eye view of what's going on up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to jump on again, and maybe we'll catch it a little bit earlier in the central time zone. And fortunately, I think I was able to mostly. I'm an old guy now, boys, so it's like I was able to mostly stay with
shut
you.
up, Wes.
But it's like sometimes I get a little tired, go to bed earlier. But yeah, I think it turned out all right.
Shut up,
awesome.
Wes. I'm older than both of you. This is not.
Winter comes for us all, my friend.
Yeah, I know. But I thank you. And, it was really great that you actually, I know some guys just kind of ignore when people say, hey, I've got a podcast. Will you come on? But I really appreciate you.
I'm happy to join you. One thing I always find interesting about those people, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I'm in the communications business. If people don't want to talk to me, whether it's in the locker room or phone calls, I can't do my job. So it's like, I always find that interesting when like journalists or people are like, I won't do your podcast, even though literally everything that I do is predicated on, excuse me, sir, will you talk to me for 4 minutes? I really need to talk to you. It's like, if you're not going to be able to pay that forward, you probably need to get into a different line of work. But yeah, no, I'm very happy to join you guys. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as always, guys, you can find us on Twitter. You can find myself at NicholasGRGR. You find Joe at Iowa_Joe86. Of course, Wes at Wes-ard. And the podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, see you later.